Hello, my name is Richard Sloane. I'm sitting here with Stephen Sadleir from the Enlightenment Now Movement, and of course, Awakening of Humanity, the movie coming out early this year. How you doing?
I am blissful. Thank you, Richard.
Great, thank you for joining us. Okay, Stephen, tell me a little bit about the Enlightenment Now Movement. How did this whole thing come about?
Well, Richard, as you can see, there's something happening all around the world. If you take yoga as probably the best example, back in the 60s, we heard about yoga. And of course, it's been around for thousands of years. But over the last few decades, the movement has grown. And a lot of that has to do with the general awareness of health and well-being. But it's really evolved into more a growth in consciousness. We're becoming more conscious of who we are and why we were born. There's kind of a movement to realize that there's something to be realized. In other words, there's more to our life than our mundane existence. There's a higher potential for man. And so the Enlightenment movement is about us enlightening. In a spiritual context, it could be looked at as the second coming, that people are becoming aware of God and the presence of God within them and around them, and the difference between the dark and the light and the play between the two, causing the suffering of mankind. And so part of the Enlightenment movement is really, in a very real world way, to say, how can we eliminate suffering? How can we eliminate war? How can we bring more joy and happiness and peace to the world? How can we create the world we want to live in? And that's what brought us to creating the Global Enlightenment movie. It was really realizing that other people aren't going to do it for us. But there's a majority of humanity that would like to live in a better world. We don't want to be in war. We want to be healthy. But who's going to make the difference? What I think the Enlightenment is when individuals begin to realize that we all play a part in making the world better. So what we're doing in the movie is we're going around to all the people that have a contribution and saying, let's create the plan ourselves. As a global effort, let's all come together, every ethnicity, every nationality, every level of science and humanity, and say, what can we do to make the world cleaner and healthier and happier and brighter? So we've been going around first speaking to spiritual teachers to approach enlightenment from a spiritual perspective, both Eastern and Western. And then we're going to political people and heads of business and economics. We're going to science and look at how science can bring about a better existence, like clean energy and alternatives to fossil fuel. And better living too. You know, what is the science of how we can eat and live well and be healthy? We have a health epidemic in the world. We're ignorant about why we're getting sick with cancer and heart disease and diabetes, and yet there is an answer. And it's all a matter of us enlightening and coming to know who we are and why we're born. And so many different people have a contribution. We're gathering them all together and presenting it both in a series and as a motion picture.
That's great, and I can see that on a big level, on an overbroad level. What would like the average person, say myself, what would they come to the Enlightenment movement seeking normally? What are these people out there trying to gather?
Good point. And at the most fundamental level, it's just finding some happiness. Now, that shows up in different ways too, because you can find people that are extremely successful, maybe financially. Maybe they have their house, their kids, a good job, they're making money, but there's still something not quite complete in their life. The great psychologist Maslow referred to a hierarchy of needs, and at some point, we're all seeking some kind of inner satisfaction. He called it self-actualization. Yogis call it self-realization. You might call it finding God. For some people, it's at a very spiritual level, but it's finding what you're here to do. And the best way to do that is to find yourself. Most people don't know who they are and why they were born. So the Enlightenment is really us coming, it's like developing a sixth sense of who you innately are, not just as a physical body with mental thoughts and emotions and behaviors, but you get to know who you are as spirit, as a spiritual being, as a consciousness itself. That's what enlightenment is about. It's bringing about an awakening of our consciousness.
Pause for 1 second. Sorry, pause for 1 second. Just remember to kind of like look more towards a little bit more towards this camera because your face is getting kind of shadowed.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just barely rubbing on your necklace. It's fine. All that worked out well. Then just adjust a little bit.
Sure, thanks.
You guys good? You still rolling?
Yeah, we're still rolling.
Okay, let's just keep it rolling. All right, and carry on.
Okay, so when you mentioned God and stuff, when it comes to this Enlightenment Now movement, how much is religion playing a part in the movement itself? Is it more religious based, or is this spiritual based? How does that line up for all the different religions that are out there?
Very good point. I think, yes, it is certainly religious, but religion is also being redefined. And I think Catholicism, for some people this might be surprising, but is leading a role in this. Back in 1999, Pope John Paul said in a papal address that hell is not a physical place. It's when you willfully estrange yourself from God. In the book of Revelation, he said, figuratively portrays souls being cast into a lake of fire. Well, I was brought up Baptist, and that's a very literal translation normally. You literally think a soul is going to be burning, and almost like the old paradigm was taken from Homer, actually. The name for hell in the Bible was Hades. And that was taken from Homer's description of Hercules going down into the earth, into an actual fiery pit. And so this idea of hell was actually taken literally. Now the Catholic Church has explained, no, this is a metaphor to explain when you are not connected with God, your life is hell. And this is the result of war and suffering in mankind, is where we're not in awareness of God's grace. And that's how Pope Benedict, who was head of the Theological See for 3 popes, this is how he describes it. He says it's not some astral world out here. It's when you live in the presence of God's grace and you feel it. It's not just an idea. It's something that happens in your heart. And now even Pope Francis has said that the Big Bang and evolution are a natural consequence of God's expression of love. This isn't counter to our belief in creation. God created the Big Bang, of course. It's actually validating. So we've gone from kind of a medieval mindset of things. And of course, my book, as you know, Christ Enlightened, goes back to some of the other things Jesus said that many people don't even know. Because the treasure troves of Semitic Christian writings, those Jews that accepted Jesus and lived in what is now Israel and Palestine, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, were all looking within themselves to find God. It wasn't just about whether you go to hell or go to heaven. Heaven and hell were a state of consciousness, and Jesus was showing us the way to find the kingdom of heaven that lies within us. So this whole process of going within was a focus of that teaching, and very few people really realize that.
That's very interesting.
So when you talk about religion and enlightenment, Christ was showing us the way to find the kingdom of heaven that lies within us. That's enlightenment by any other name.
Okay. And with that, something you strive to teach people?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you see, a lot of people approach, the beautiful thing is you can blend spirituality and science today. And we all know that there's something causing life within us. There's energy moving in our nervous system, there's energy moving in our chi, there's electromagnetic fields around our body, so we know there's something there causing life within us. And by any other name, that's spirit, right? So if you want to get to know your spirit, you can actually connect with it directly. And that's what the Shakti and the Shakti pot is all about. And when people talk about Kundalini, well, there's energy running up and down your nervous system. There's energy flowing through your chi. We know that now. There's electromagnetic fields around our body. So what we're really doing is we're taking spiritual concepts that were kind of woo-woo. Kundalini, it sounds weird. It's not a word in the English language, right? So talking about an energy that moves up your spine was very out there for decades, right? But now we understand the nervous system. Now we see how a chakra corresponds with an endocrine gland, and that endocrine glands are actually ductless glands that conduct energy in our body or transform it from one gradient to another, producing hormones. We realized, gee, these yogis were just really being aware of things happening in the body the same way in modern science we call the endocrine system, they were calling a chakra system. And so there's a blending of science with spirituality and the idea of, what is God? And we're realizing that there's a consciousness even in physics. And so people that are atheists coming from a scientific perspective perhaps, are beginning to realize, no, there's still a creator, but look at how beautifully the creator is creating. There's a system to it, there's an order to it, there's an intelligence to creation.
I like that. Okay, and I may be wrong here, so correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of knowledge with the things you're talking about as far as the general population is concerned.
Right.
When would you first notice that it was almost your responsibility to tell people these things that you've learned that you felt they need to know? When did you first pick up on, I need to get this word out so that people know how to enlighten themselves and change for the better?
You know, I kind of grew up living in a spiritual world and had to adapt to being in a physical world. I was sitting cross-legged in meditation at 5 years old, and my mother and father had no idea what I was doing. I would just sit all the time. And then around 8 years old, I had a near-death experience. From a tonsillectomy, I reacted to the anesthesia, and my heart breathing stopped. And God spoke to me. I'd left my body. I saw myself there as they tried to jump-start my heart with the electric shock treatment, you know. And I eventually came back into my body, but with this kind of knowing that I was here for a reason. I didn't want to come back. That's all I remember, but I needed to come back. Like there was some purpose in coming back. And that I wouldn't say it haunted me, but it stayed with me all the way up to the point where I was about 16. So by the time I was 16, I was already going around to different churches, trying to learn all I could about God. I was reading books like the Bhagavad Gita at a very young age that you normally wouldn't find interest in a book like that. And so at 16, I just got a Volkswagen Beetle, and I drove up the 395, and I went to Independence, climbed up to the top of the Palisades Glacier, and there in a vision quest, I was praying and beseeching God to reveal himself to me and kind of give me some direction in life. And there God spoke to me, not as a voice in the clouds, but more as maybe a profound realization that I guess my calling would be to study virtually every path to God in the world, to know God. I should study all the paths to God in the world, all the religions, and write a book about it. And so that became my calling. And at 16, I took the next 20 years of my life and just focused on that almost every evening and weekend. You know, if I didn't have to go to school or work, that was my life. And that culminated in the publishing of Looking for God, a spiritual seeker's guide to religions and spiritual paths of the world, which became a bestseller on Amazon. And it was kind of my preparation. It was kind of like my basic training in spirituality to first understand. So I got to meet with lots of different yogis. You know, I started practicing yoga when I was in elementary school. There was a show called Yoga for Health on TV back in the 60s. It was in black and white. And I would come home from school because my mom worked. And I had nothing to do, so I turned it on, and I'd be doing headstands, and
sure.
And that's how. And then later on, I studied with other teachers, and eventually I got to study with most of the teachers out there, and wrote a book about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I do yoga myself. I use it mostly for strength training and that part of it. What do you see the time, and how does yoga help you and help others generally increase like your enlightenment feeling?
Right.
More on the spirituality basis. How do you see it benefiting you that way?
Well, yoga, you could think of yoga as the science of the self. Now, most people come to yoga through the physical postures. In other words, they see there's a benefit in practicing yoga because they see people practicing yoga that aren't just flexible. Their bodies get toned and they're less stressed and they seem happy. I mean, this is a universal effect of yoga. But yoga itself is the science of the self, and the first step is the yoga postures or asanas and the breathing exercises, because breathing is a very important part of yoga, and it becomes a meditation in itself. It's called pranayama. So there are these 8 limbs, 8 kind of phases or facets to yoga. There's yama and niyama, which mean restraint and observances. So there's guidance on things you shouldn't do or should do. Mindfulness. Becoming conscious of what you're thinking, saying, and doing. And then you get involved in the postures, because that's going to help align your spine, clear out tension, and enable your mind to relax. And the breathing deepens that connection. Then you learn what's called pratyahara, some basic meditation, maybe a mantra, a chant. Then you will learn the next limit. It's called Dharan, something more focused, requiring a little more mental discipline, maybe gazing in your third eye, it's this kind of a thing. Then you go to Dhyan, and for Dhyan you really need a guru or somebody that has kind of been to this place before of higher consciousness, because the idea is your meditation takes you to a place where you move beyond the mental programming. So we can look at ourselves as having a form and neurons and almost like a computer in our brain, but there's somebody watching the computer and operating the vehicle. But our brain doesn't necessarily know this part of ourself. It's still evolving. Swamiji would call it the sixth sense. So literally up in the frontal and temporal lobes of the neocortex, there is what is called dendritic branching, where the brain cells begin to connect, create connections, developing the brain matter, developing the sixth sense of who you are and why you were born. And so that leads you, that process of concentration, particularly on your life force, brings you into what's called samadhi, to withhold together completely, which is the buzz that you hear about, how blissful or pleasant it can be. And when you go into these higher states and you practice being in these states again and again, you end up living in that state. You actually enter into the presence of God, or the kingdom of heaven, because it's already spread out before us. It's already here. God never left, but it's like we're living in the presence of God, but we haven't realized it yet. And that's why it's God realization. We're awakening to the realization that God never left, and this kingdom of heaven is already spread out upon the earth. We have only to open our eyes to see it.
I like that too. Okay.
Yeah.
What can you tell me then about meditation? I know this is important, to you. And I meditate as well. I meditated with you the other night. It was amazing. It was a lot of fun. How important is that to someone on their daily life, and what kind of advantages and takeaways can someone get from that?
Well, first of all, there's many different kinds of meditation, and as far as I'm concerned, they're all good. But meditation in general is a way of maybe relaxing the mind. But potentially define yoga as the cessation of mental modification, meaning when your thoughts slow down, what is becomes apparent, kind of like a sun burning away the fog until you can see more clearly. So the more we meditate, the more our stress begins to melt away. And the tension in our body and the fear, any anger, any disturbing thoughts or feelings naturally are dispelled by the light of our own indwelling spirit. The more we connect with our own life force, the more that life force or spirit can shine. So when we meditate, we like to practice what's called Shaktipat, which is simply putting our attention on the spirit energy in our body, our life force. And the more you focus on it, the clearer it gets. It's like anything else. You practice tuning in, and the clearer it gets and the stronger it gets, the more love and bliss actually starts to fill you up. And people find that hard to believe, because most people don't live in bliss. But we've got, tens to hundreds of thousands of people now practicing this meditation. It proves that it works. And it's not a matter of following me or following even a lineage or following a certain practice. It's really a matter of you looking within yourself to find the answers within yourself. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, good.
Okay. And most people we think are capable of doing that.
Everyone's capable, but sometimes we have stories that we cling to. Like a lot of people growing up here will meditation is something counter to their religion, say, which it isn't. I'm a Christian, but I meditate every day. I feel God's presence when I meditate. That's the easier way. I told my grandmother, Ruth, she goes, well, you meditate and I pray. I said, well, Grandma, I pray too. Pray is when you reach out to God by whatever way or you think of God or call God, whatever made the Big Bang Boom. We all recognize that there is a higher power or a divine presence in life, causing and directing life. And so praying is really connecting with that, or making that maybe that acknowledgement, or being open to receive that guidance. And then meditation is basically clearing your head so you can hear it. You can't hear God's guidance if your mind's busy talking. So if you can just clear your head by whatever way you meditate, you can meditate in biblical scripture for that matter. But when your mind becomes clear like a placid lake, it reflects back to you the nature of your own being, and you feel that living presence of God just naturally well up within you.
Good. Okay. Where would you tell somebody who may be watching this right now, or looked on the internet and came across it? Where would you ask them to go to find out more about learning how to meditate properly, or the yoga and things you spoke about now? Where's a good resource for them to start?
Well, there's probably two good venues. One is to find a yoga studio in your city. Now, we're in Reno. Reno's full of excellent yoga teachers of many different disciplines. But the other way is to go to enlightenmentnow.com or selfawareness.com. I do courses over the internet. We're doing a retreat in Sedona this summer, and that's always posted. So we can do it online. Most of my students have never met me. 99% of my students have connected either through Enlightenment Radio, through some kind of media, maybe a live call. We do live calls, because the Shakti can be felt anywhere, all over the world. Anybody can plug into it at any time.
Okay, so important to find Stephen, find him online, research, see what's in your local area there. Let's talk about the movie.
Sure.
Okay, so coming out in March.
Yeah.
Where did the movie come from?
Well, it started many years ago with a vision of trying to create a better world, and realizing that we can't wait for someone else to do it for us, that people need to kind of stand up as a collective body and participate in the awakening. So I was thinking, well, who are the people that can guide us? Where would we go to get that information or to get that assistance? And I always start with God, so I thought, well, let's connect with spiritual people, or ministers, or yogis, people that have thought about how to create enlightenment are the best places. So, and then we were moving out into political experts, prime ministers and presidents. We have large corporate executives, economists, scientists, creative people, including actors and actresses, are all involved, and it's growing. But we started in India because I wrote my book on world religions, and I got very connected, obviously, with meditation and yoga. And I knew some of the gurus there. I could get to some of the, like Sri Ravi Shankar and Satguru Jaggi Vasudeva. They got millions and millions of followers, and they're world experts on enlightenment. So they very graciously, we went there last summer, and what was it? I think it was June. And we got to interview, I think, half a dozen of some of the biggest gurus in India. And so we were well on our way in Gloab Enlightment, and we had a week left over in Rishikesh. And we thought, well, what's the best use of our time now? And Gwen and Raj, our line producer from India, were saying, well, let's do some satsangs. Why don't we have some discussions since you're here? I'd been going around India actually leading meditations and giving talks at different ashrams in India and on different television programs in India. And so he said, well, let's keep on with that. And they developed, I think, 108 questions. And then Gwen and I sat down and we kind of narrowed it down to what would be the most important things to share, because we realized most people don't know what enlightenment is. I say things like there's an awakening occurring within the consciousness of humanity. Well, what does that mean? We kind of have a sense of that maybe. Again, watching the boom in yoga, the boom in meditation, people talk about mindfulness. It's on Oprah Winfrey now, you know? So we thought, let's give a little lesson on what enlightenment is, on what yoga is, the different forms of meditation, some of the same questions you're asking me. So there's kind of a one-stop shop. In an hour and a half, we'd cover the bases and guide them in a meditation at the very end. So that it's an interactive movie. As you're watching it, you're going to feel energy moving through your body. You actually participate in the movie while it's playing. And then we also could take nice snippets. So if I explain enlightenment, okay, that's one perspective. We went over to hear what Sri Ravi Shankar had to say, and then Satguru Jaggi Vasudeva and so forth. So you could hear lots of different perspectives on these things.
What was it like shooting in India and going to these gurus' homes and stuff? Was that, challenging one to do it? I don't know. How would that have been?
Well, yeah, most of the challenges actually were just, we have a lot of creative and powerful people. And just whenever you work with people and you're around each other every day, there were some challenges there, but they were really good people and we got through it really easy. So I wouldn't even consider it problematic. Working with the gurus is nothing but a charm. It's like going into a love vortex. You walk in there and it's just that you want to hug everybody. There's so much love.
What was these gurus, what was their homes like? And when you're visiting their places of teaching, and they invited you to their house, what was it like going into their house?
Well, you typically don't actually go into their house. Now, if you go, for instance, to Bangalore, or Belarus, they say now, and Sri Sri Ravi Shankar has a beautiful, I don't know, 1,000-acre ashram or something. And there are areas outside where he can give a talk. They light it up, pretty lights, and they dance, they play music. It almost like a Burning Man experience, joyous dancing kind of thing. And then he lectures. There's also an inner lecture hall where they get hundreds of people and they all meditate together. Usually there's some maybe meditation gardens and that kind of thing. We were really lucky. He put us up in his own there were private quarters near the house. We weren't in his kitchen and living room, but he was spoiling us, I think, a little bit. We had a nice view of the lake, and we got to spend a lot of time with him, which made the movie really look good, because he's really good.
From all the gurus that you met that are in this film, what one, and this may be hard to answer, but what one piece of advice or phrase that one of them say to you that you might recall the most, that stuck out to you more than anything?
Well, the one thing that I thought was clever, that I wish I'd thought of, is Ravi Shankar was talking about the breath. I was asking about Sudarshan Kriyas. And he says, the first thing we do in life is we take a breath in. And the last thing we do in life is we take a breath out. And all our life we're breathing and we really never think about it. He goes, the breath has a lot to teach us. And I thought that was a very elegant way to say it.
Yeah.
And sweet. And he simplified it. So he took something that could be complicated and he made it just so elegant and sweet. And my guru used to do that. Yogi Raj Dattatreya Maharishi, he's known in India. He was one of the biggest gurus in India. And he's kind of known as the common man's philosopher, because he could take Kundalini, that's kind of a very abstract thought, and he brought it down into a way to explain it, made it so simple and easy, and in a practice that anybody could do, which is the simple third eye meditation and working with the biomagnetic fields and letting the joyous feeling guide you in the meditation. So there's no work to meditating. Most people try and grind their mind down and stop their mind
too much.
But if you just plug on the light, just flick so when you look at your third eye, that's like flicking on a light switch, right? All of a sudden you feel the energy and it's like, oh, that feels good. Your mind wants that. So it's less inclined to wander to another thought because it feels pretty good over here. Give me more. It's like I like to think of it as kissing God. It's like you're, when you're kissing, there's an intimacy that's just delicious. When you connect with the life force energy of your body, you're connecting with God. And there's this beautiful intimacy, this beautiful connection that's made through the spirit. And that's what it's all about. It's making that connection. And that's love.
Right.
In the end, it's all about love.
What it's all about.
It's all about love.
So the movie's done now. What do you hope that people really take away from it?
Well, I hope they enlighten. So Enlightenment Now, the awakening of humanity, is just that. It's an explanation of what enlightenment is, how we can bring about the awakening of humanity so that we can actually create more happiness and peace. And then we give everybody the experience of learning how to connect with their life force so they can continue to evolve their own consciousness to its highest expression and experience this joy and happiness and peace for themselves. All you got to do is practice it. So what's really cool about it is the movie is the method for the enlightenment. Once you watch the movie, it activates that part of you that's really already enlightened or enlightening. But it feeds it. It goes right to that the soul and helps bring out that light while you're watching. So it's more of an interactive experience than just a passive absorption of information.
Interactive.
Yeah, it's not just processing thoughts and ideas. It's like you actually walk out of there going, wow, I feel different. We just did a showing in Arcata, our first showing, and we had a good attendance, and everybody walked out of there basically stoned.
Really?
You get high on God.
That's a good feeling too.
Uh-huh.
So you just did your first show, and when does it officially premiere?
Well, we're going back to India to continue filming for Gloab Enlightment, and we're starting a new film, a feature film on yoga. So in March, we're going to have the Rishikesh Art and Film Festival. that is right after the International Yoga Festival. And now we're combining resources, and we're going to be filming both. And so our preview, our film will be featured in Rishikesh, where we film most of it. And we've assembled gurus from all over the country, in fact, all over the world. We're going to have a world peace meditation, and there'll be a representative from each religion. We've got some really high-ranking Rinpoches and some of the top gurus from all over India coming to focus on world peace, and then we're going to invite all the world to join us. They can stream on. It'll be occurring over a series of days, too. So it's a participatory thing where everybody can get involved and help this movement move forward.